Hi, Lou Pulsifer here to talk about more need-to-knows about game design. 11 if I counted correctly. The original 10 wasn't enough. I thought of more than 10, so I started to write them down, and I've got another lot. The first 10 are the most important, I think, but these are also important. Here's the list. And if you're wondering about the first 10, that video is on my game design channel on YouTube. First one, and these are not in any particular order, focus on the essence. Every game has an essence. You can usually summarize the game in a few sentences. And it doesn't need to be really complicated. My motto is a designer knows he has achieved perfection, not when there's nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. Or, your garden is not complete until there is nothing else that you can remove, about Japanese gardens. Now, if you're making a puzzle, complexity might be one of your goals, because that's going to make the puzzle last longer and be perhaps harder to solve. If you're making an experience, as many video game designers are, and some tabletop RPGers try to do, simplicity may not be your goal. But for most games, the goal is to keep only what you absolutely need. And for any game, there are going to be lots of things that you have to remove in order to make it a better game. Second one, professionals design games for other people, not for themselves. Your job is to entertain or enlighten other people if you're making commercial games. If you're designing games for yourself, then you can think of your job as entertaining yourself if you wish. Consider also you are not typical, or you wouldn't be designing games. So what you like may not be typical of what other people like, and you've got to figure out your target audience and make something that entertains them or enlightens them. So don't rely solely on your own opinions about the worth of a game. Rely on the playtesters. I recently had a game published that I didn't think was such a big deal, but it was a nice little game, but other people had different opinions. And I've had games that I thought were outstanding, but have not been published. I like to say that 35 years ago I had 4 games I thought were particularly outstanding. 3 of them have not been published. The other one was Britannia, so at least I was right about one of them. Professional game design is about discipline, not self-indulgence. Unless, again, you're designing games as a hobby. Of course, then it's not professional game design. There are designers who are self-indulgent. Sometimes they think they're a gift to the world, and whatever they do is great and wonderful. Poppycock. Again, you can do that, but not if you plan to sell games. It's much better to take a player-centric view, that you're designing games for the players, not a designer-centric view where you're designing a game for yourself, or an art-centric view where you're designing a game for artists. Game design is always a compromise. It's never perfect, but you can aim in the right directions. Game design is not mind control. Some designers want to, in effect, control all the player is doing and thinking, if they can. If you think about it, that's more or less what a novelist is doing. Though I would say most novelists want to influence the reader, not control them. Now, linear video games can approach this ideal where the player has to follow a particular path and do what the designers want the player to do. But most game players actually want to have the ability to control the outcome of a game. And they want agency as well, which is, again, related. It's the ability to make a difference in how the game ends. Especially important in video games. So I'd say it's better to think of game design as offering the players opportunities and not forcing anything on them. There is no perfect game. There are dozens of game genres for a reason, because lots of people like lots of different things in games. You find, or I find, novice game designers who think that everybody likes the same things that they do, and that's not true at all. And if you think about movies or music or something like that, you'll realize people like different things. I dislike rap music, I like classical. Other people could be exactly the opposite. Also, there's no room for perfectionism in professional game design. You've got to get games done. Time does matter. And there's a law of diminishing marginal returns that sets in, where it becomes more expensive in time than the change you can make in it to improve the game as you go along. At some point, whether it's 100 hours of effort and one little minor change, you'll decide this is not worth it. We've got to go on to something else. The game won't be perfect. But no game is perfect. Even games that have been published and played by thousands or millions of people and they're happy about it are not perfect, and then a new edition comes out which might be a better game. Another thing that seems to confuse beginning designers, you probably won't be good at game design at first. It doesn't matter how good a game player you are, game design is a different kettle of fish. Ask yourself, how often do you start something that's complex, something that requires a lot of critical thinking, and you're still really good at it when you start? Never happens. You're not good at it at all when you start. In general, most complex things that are worth doing take a long time to do well. Even playing a game, becoming a master at playing a game, can take a long time. And playing a game is relatively simple compared to designing a game. Now, there are people who theorize that you need a great many opportunities to fail or succeed before you can become good at something, and there's this notion of you need to have 10,000 hours to master something. I don't take that quantification seriously, but it's certainly true that you need to take a lot of time to become good at something, and it's certainly true of game design. Now, games are not just mechanics. What matters is the impression you make on the players. There's something that's frequently used in video games called the MDA, Mechanics, Dynamics, Aesthetics. I prefer impressions for the last because we're talking about what impression the game makes on the players. That's what's important, and if you want to call that an experience, okay. Games that are just collections of mechanics can feel soulless. On the other hand, if you choose mechanics based on a model, you're trying to model something, those mechanics will tend to fit together better. If they're just collections of mechanics, mental gymnastics I call it, they'll often not fit together. If you're doing a game as a collection of mechanics, make sure it's very simple as you can get it. Making a game, a good game anyway, takes a lot of time. Most of what happens is in the mind of the designer and the minds of the players. And outsiders or people who are not practitioners tend to minimize the amount of effort that goes into a game because they don't see it happening. In practice, it's easy to get a game to an 80% point, but that's usually not a very good game. It's the last 20% that takes most of the game design time and effort. And then if it's a tabletop game, there's going to be scheduling and manufacturing that'll take many months. If it's a video game, through digital distribution, you can publish it fairly quickly. Mayfair Games, who publishes Settlers of Catan in the United States, recently published a game they'd had for 8 years. I have a game that might be published in 2015. The publisher accepted it in 2005. Now, I probably should have done something to pull it back sooner. I didn't. Piracy. Piracy of anything that is digitally produced, that is just electrons, is rampant, whether it's games, books, or something else. And there's practically nothing you can do about it, unfortunately. Free-to-play video games helps because you don't mind if people pirate it, because you want to distribute it as widely as possible. But even in those games, the in-app purchases are pirated regularly. People figure out ways to hack the game and do the purchases without actually paying any money. Fortunately for tabletop gamers, there's not much piracy, unless the game is primarily a rule book like an RPG, and then there's just as much piracy as otherwise. You're an entertainer or a teacher, not a gift to the world, if you want to be a commercial game designer. Publishers are in the business of making money. So you've got to produce a game that people are willing to spend money on. Yes, you can self-publish, but then you're starting to get into where you might be doing game design as a hobby. Otherwise, you've got to discipline yourself that you need to produce games that'll make money. A lot more people want games to entertain or enlighten themselves than they want games as art. Now here's a quote from Shigeru Miyamoto, who's done Zelda games, Donkey Kong, Wii Fit. He is the most famous video game designer. We want to entertain people by surprising them. So I really don't think we are psychologists. We are nothing but entertainers. And Reiner Knizia, who's published over 500 games, also says his purpose is entertainment. And here is the last one, fail faster. When you're designing a game, you want to find all the ways that the game can fail and eliminate those ways or fix them. So the faster you fail, the quicker you can eliminate or fix the failures, or realize that you can't do that and then you decide to start over with a different game. It's better to figure that out in a few weeks or a month or 5 months than it is to figure it out after a year or two. So get a playable prototype done as soon as possible. There's no substitute. If you're doing a video game, try to make a paper prototype first, which will be much quicker than making a video prototype, and try things out. That's very common nowadays, and it can help you a lot. So, until I think of more need to knows, enjoy your designing.